Hello, lovelies. Hope you're having a great evening. So, it's very cold outside, so I hope you're in someplace warm. At least it's cold in my neck of the woods. Maybe some of you live down south um, and are enjoying warmer temperatures. I think it's like 10 degrees outside now or something. It's kind of ridiculous. Anyway, I've been inside in my flannel with my blanket and my hot chocolate, so I've been fine. So, well, I'm so glad that you can join tonight. As you're popping on, feel free to say hi in the comments and um, just introduce yourself or just say hello and throw out your questions as you watch through the video, and I'll answer as I can as well. Um, so we're going to give it just a couple of minutes for as people are arriving, but I just wanted to introduce myself. For those of you that don't know, my name is Katie Phillips. I'm a fiction editor and a writing coach. So I spend a lot of time helping authors clarify their story and where they want to go with their business and helping them make those dreams a reality. So I have a pretty awesome job. So if you were watching my Writer Wednesday talks, I do one of these talks every Wednesday night, and just about different topics related to writing and writing business. If you were with me last week, you remember that we were talking about world building and how to really leverage world building in your storytelling to make the most of that. And so what we're going to be talking about tonight is how to use world building to really add depth and dimension to your characters. And this is something that I really, really love. I love introducing depth to characters, using world building, using cultures. And I think there, kind of before I dig in too much, I think there's a bit of a misconception that world building is only useful if you're writing fantasy or some sort of great epic made up culture. But actually I found that it's just as important if you're writing historical fiction or really any other genre to really consider the factors and the values and the cultural elements that are going to influence your character and your story. So even I specialize with working with speculative authors, but even if you don't write in those genres, I think this will be really helpful for you. So I guess I just want to start out by saying that real characters are products of culture because real people are products of culture. And I really want to emphasize that, because when you're trying to create characters that are really going to connect with your readers, that are going to be unique, that are going to be memorable, that are really are going to remain in their mind, one of the things that I see is that in a lot of manuscripts written by amateur writers, the characters have sort of no discernible culture to them. And yet a person's culture is really uniquely wrapped up in who they are. And I didn't realize how much until I went and I lived overseas for almost 3 years. And I lived overseas in England, and then I also worked with a nonprofit. And so I was going to different countries every few weeks. And so that was really emphasized to me how much the culture environment that we grew up in affects who we are as people and the way we make decisions. And usually we see the effect that our culture has had on us in a couple different ways, and there are a couple different areas. So the first one is going to be your core. So this is the internal way that your culture affects you. This is the way that you see yourself. This is the way that you look at the world and kind of your place in the world and what your culture has told you about that. And then the second thing we're going to look at is the external. And this is what people usually see. These are things like language, clothing, are they on time? Are they always late? Those kind of elements are the external elements of culture that we see and that are most easy to apply to our characters. But one of the really important aspects of effective world building is to make sure you have consistency. And so I always recommend looking at the core values of your culture and the core values of your character first, and then extrapolating on those to reach your externals rather than the other way around. But it may work better for you to kind of compile the externals and dig into the core values from there. I'm just saying, I think it makes more sense to start with the core and kind of work out, as it were. So let's go back to the core. Some of this will sound familiar to you if you were watching my video on world building last week. But one of the really key things to start out with when you're looking at character and how does the culture affect them is, what do they value? Okay, do they value individual achievement, or do they value community achievement? Are they team players, or are they super ambitious and wanting to kind of get ahead for their own personal gain or fame or whatever? This can be, do they value human life? Do they value women? There's a lot of culture where women aren't perceived as having an equal place in society. So that's also a value that can be very important. There's different values in terms of religious point of view. So what is the religious structure that this person grew up in, and how did this affect their life? And what did it tell them about who they are, whether they're valuable, whether, there's the idea of karma, whether fate's responsible, or there's a loving God, or there's a distant God maybe. All of these things really shape how your character sees themselves, sees their personal value, sees their role in the universe in general, and specifically in their culture and within their family. And so it's really important to consider these so you know how your character will respond in situations that challenge their values. Okay, so let me give you an example of this. One of the primary culture groups that I worked with when I was living overseas, I worked with a lot of Brazilians. And if you've never met Brazilians, you know that they're wonderful, warm people who are very relationship oriented. So they love a party, they love to have fun, they'll sit and talk for just hours. And that's all like really wonderful, obviously. But one of the things that becomes a challenge then is, I also work with a lot of Germans. And if you know anything about Germans, they're very task oriented, right? So we have the Brazilians who are very people oriented, and then Germans who tend to be very task oriented and are all about the efficiency, and that's why they make awesome cars and all sorts of things. But the problem became that the Germans were very much like, okay, let's find the most efficient way to do this. And, or they're very time sensitive. Everything's on time. You're not like, if you're 2 minutes late for a meeting, you're late, right? And then you have the sort of Brazilian perspective, which goes for a lot of warm culture climates as well. Is this people oriented? So, if they're having a great conversation with someone, that's more important than being on time for their next meeting. And that's a way of honoring that person. And so you can see right away that this creates a clash because they value different things, or they prioritize different values. So be aware of that, because this is a great way to create natural tension between characters. And especially if your character is in a culture that's not their home culture, this can also create conflict with that character and within that foreign culture as well. So that's something to consider. Along with the religious beliefs aspect of it, I think that sometimes Christians are reluctant to portray a variety of beliefs in their work because they're afraid of that kind of being misconstrued or something like that. But I think it's really important to not just let your characters have a spiritual vacuum. And this is what I see a lot. There's not really a lot of spiritual dimension or depth. And yet that is a huge integral part for so many people around the world. And so I really think it does characters a disservice to not address that in some way, or have them have some kind of spiritual struggle or spiritual background or religious background that's going to shape their habits, what they eat, what they don't eat. If they pray 5 times a day, if they go to mass, whatever that is, and whatever that looks like in your culture, for your story world, those kind of habits are going to be something that really gives a lot of authenticity to your characters. Their religious views also kind of play into their moral code, their view of right and wrong, and again, just sort of the broader sense of their view of themselves and where they fit into the world. Okay, so if you're wanting to really flesh out your character and add some authenticity and some depth, start by digging into these elements of character, so that you can start getting a feel for what matters most to them and how they see the world, because their unique perspective is what's going to create that beautiful diversity of characters in your story that readers are really going to remember. And so from those core values or those core sort of internal beliefs, you can kind of extrapolate some of the external things as well. So you have some obvious ones. Language is an obvious one. Maybe they speak a different language. Maybe they speak many different languages. Maybe they have a dialect that is associated with poorer classes, and so they are persecuted by other characters because they don't speak in a way that's acceptable by society. Maybe they have a very posh way of speaking, right? And that tells you something about that character as well. It tells you whether they were well educated. Maybe it tells you what part of the country they're from. So language is an area which is fun. You can do a lot with it, and you can kind of showcase a lot about a character through the way that they communicate with other people. And by the way, this can also be styles of communication. So some cultures are very direct in their communication, and other cultures will almost always kind of go in the back door if they're approaching a conflict and kind of work around to it. So think about that as well for your cultural values. Let's see, let me check, make sure I'm not forgetting anything. Oh yeah, this also goes with the people or task-oriented thing as well. So if they're very task-oriented, they're more likely to have a direct style of communication because it's very efficient. If they're more people and community-minded, they're much more likely to kind of take the backdoor approach and be very polite and be very subtle about the way that they communicate in conflict. So that's something to consider as well. Kind of playing into this too with the environment questions that I addressed in a previous video on world building is weaponry. So if you have conflict or a character who's a fighter in your story, think about the culture that they're from. How does that affect what weapons they use, what materials those weapons are made out of? Because that's going to depend on what level of technology and industry was available to them. And fighting styles as well is going to be affected by their cultural heritage and where they came from. So those are things to consider too. And even on a practical level, even something as simple as what kind of foods does this character eat? You can really characterize them a lot by their favorite foods. And that can be based, again, on environment. So what's going to be available to them? What did they eat growing up? What has kind of a nostalgia for them? Maybe they, for example, like someone who like grew up in the South, like their favorite drink might be like peach sweet tea or something like that. And it just adds a fun element of realism to your character and tells you something about the culture that they grew up in. So those can be fun elements to add as well. So make sure when you're wanting to add depth to your character, you really dig into their core values first, their religious beliefs, how they see themselves, how they see others, and kind of their place in this world. And then from there, you're going to extrapolate into those external factors like language, the way that they communicate. Are they people or task-oriented? What clothes do they wear? What is their relationship with time? What are their weapons and fighting styles? Favorite foods? All of those kind of details which you can incorporate then into your story in a very natural way to give the reader clues about the culture and the story world. And this is a great way. I had some people asking about how do you communicate world building information without doing an info dump or something like that. This is a great way to do that, through sensory details, through your character interacting with these elements of their culture or their story world. That will tell you a lot about the culture in a very natural way. So that's a great way to do that. So that's all I'm going to cover tonight. Go ahead and feel free to post your questions in the comments, and I will respond to those as I'm able. World building is one of those things. It's so vast and so complex, and there's so many aspects to it that it is kind of hard to know where to start. But once you start breaking it down, it does flow naturally from one thing to the other. So I'd love to hear your world building questions. Go ahead and throw that out there specifically as it relates to your characters. I'd be happy to workshop those with you. And I will go ahead and monitor the comments over the next few days. So if you're watching this in the replay, feel free to post them as well. So one of the things that's really, really important with world building is being able to not just tell information about the world, right? The info dump thing again. But also to really show that and bring the reader into that space and into that place and time. And so one of the things that I see a lot of writers struggling with is this idea of show versus tell. And we talk about it a lot in writers' conferences and books and that kind of thing, but there still seems to be a lot of confusion about what is this, how do you fix it, all of that. So I'm going to tackle a little bit about show versus tell issues next week on my next Writer Wednesday. We're going to talk about that. I'm going to try and workshop some sentences for you. Might be a little bit hard on video, so just bear with me as we sort of figure out how to do that. And I also encourage you to message me or submit like a paragraph of your work on my page. I'll extend an invitation, and then I'll workshop some of those then next week as we kind of go through. Okay, sound good? All right, well, thank you so much for joining, and you have a great evening. Hope this was helpful for you. Bye.